are about to discover the story that the American government doesn't want you to know. This is not about sanctions. This is not about national security. This is about power, and even more about who will still hold it in 5 years. While the whole world had eyes turned toward the Middle East, the conflict in the Red Sea, or the developments in the Ukraine war, something profound and almost silent occurred right here, under Americans' eyes. Canada has moved from being a figurant to being a driver of global energy, and this without the help of the United States but with China's assistance. The same China that, according to Trump, represents the greatest threat to the American way of life. But while he was talking about tariffs, walls, and energy nationalism, Beijing was acting with surgical precision that would make the Pentagon pale. It all started with the stroke of a pen in Ottawa. A multi-billion-dollar deal between the Canadian government and Rongcheng Petrochemical, China's largest private refinery, was signed without fanfare, without making headlines in the American press, but with seismic consequences. This company, which alone refines more than 800,000 barrels of oil per day, decided to open a base in the heart of the Canadian oil industry in Calgary. We're not talking about a simple office. We're talking about massive refining and export infrastructure directly to Asia. The first time in decades, Canadian oil has begun to massively leave the American orbit. While the United States imposed a 10% tax on Canadian oil, with the aim of stifling their main energy supplier, China was rolling out the red carpet. What was supposed to be an American show of force has turned into a gift for Beijing. If you find this information revealing, make sure to like this video right now, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to stay informed about what's really happening behind the headlines. The United States, historically dependent on Canada's energy stability, is now betting against their most reliable ally. Why? The answer lies between the lines of Donald Trump's policy. In his quest for greatness, he transformed Canada from a strategic ally into a commercial adversary. And like any intelligent nation facing economic pressure, Canada sought new alternatives, a new center of gravity. While American taxes made Canadian oil more expensive and thus less competitive in the United States, and Asia, hungry for new energy sources to fuel its industries, saw Canada as a reliable, democratic, and resource-rich partner. The export pipeline was reconfigured. New investments were made in the port of Prince Rupert in British Columbia, reducing the maritime distance to China by several days. In other words, Canadian oil no longer needs the United States to circulate. The relationship between the United States and Canada, once considered unshakable, is beginning to show real cracks. A tax here, a diplomatic affront there, an absurd annexation proposal in between, and in the midst of all this, energy, the most strategic asset of the 21st century, becomes a bargaining chip. Canada represents everything that threatens Trumpist rhetoric, a progressive multicultural country with a stable parliamentary democracy, universal healthcare system, and now energy autonomy with its own customers outside the American sphere. This autonomy is what worries Washington the most. Until now, the United States has always counted on the fact that Canadian oil would be available like an obedient little brother, always ready to follow orders. But this little brother has grown up and is now doing business with China. Rongcheng Petrochemical didn't choose Calgary by accident. It's a symbolic, geopolitical, and commercial gesture. It's planting a flag in Uncle Sam's backyard, proving to the whole world that China can compete with the United States right in their own sphere of influence. The trade war had begun with steel, cars, and semiconductors. It's now attacking the energy sector, and unlike other sectors, oil shapes nations' foreign policy. Canadian oil is cleaner, more stable, and cheaper than Saudi Arabian oil. That's why ASEAN countries are so interested. That's why Rongcheng's presence in Calgary is a disguised earthquake. And meanwhile, in the United States, the 10% tax means that the average American pays more for gasoline, diesel, plastics, fertilizers, everything that depends on energy. Trump claims it's a way to protect the domestic industry. But which industry? The United States needs to import oil, and by taxing their biggest suppliers, they're literally hurting their own population. And that's not the only contradiction. The most ironic thing is that while the official discourse is America first, the numbers say otherwise. In 2025, for the first time in history, China became the second largest buyer of Canadian oil, even surpassing some American states. We are witnessing a relocation of power, a Canada-China axis that few would have predicted 10 years ago. And this is not happening due to ideological affinity. It's happening out of necessity, and necessity creates alliances. Canada is trading the comfort of American dependence for the harshness of global independence. Imagine this. You wake up on a Saturday morning finally planning to change your car. You've worked hard, saved every penny, done your research on models, and you're ready to buy the Ford F-150 of your dreams, an American symbol, a promise of strength, freedom, and power on four wheels. But when you arrive at the dealership, the salesman looks at you with an embarrassed smile. Listen, the model that was $48,000 yesterday has gone up to nearly $60,000 today, he says, trying to mask his discomfort. It's the new tax. It comes directly from Washington. This story may seem isolated, but it's repeating itself in thousands of cities across the United States. It's a deliberate and calculated political decision. In a move that experts describe as shooting oneself in the foot, Donald Trump has imposed a 25% tax on any vehicle that isn't entirely manufactured in the United States. In theory, this should protect the domestic industry, bring back jobs, and strengthen Made in America. In practice, it's devastating the very backbone of the American automobile industry. Let's go back to the Ford F-150, Americans' favorite. It may seem 100% domestic, assembled in factories in Kentucky, Missouri, and Michigan, but the reality is that it depends on a complex, precise global supply chain that is now collapsing. A single vehicle is composed of more than 30,000 parts, and many come from abroad. Alternator from Mexico, rims from South Korea, drive shaft from Canada. Today, all these parts are taxed with the same force that Trump claims to reserve for China. The American consumer is transformed, without having chosen it, into a soldier in a trade war they never asked for. Companies like GM, Ford, and Stellantis aren't reacting with patriotism or optimism. They're reacting with production cuts, layoffs, investment suspensions. In the Flint, Michigan region, where entire factories have supported families for generations, more than 3,200 workers have been technically unemployed, laid off in just 90 days after the announcement of the new taxes. And many of them had voted for Trump, believing in his promise to bring back industry. What they received was a letter from Human Resources. Trump says cars will cost more, but factories will come back. But is that really the case? A study conducted by the Boston Consulting Group shows that repatriating the entire automobile production chain to the United States would take at least 6 years and cost more than $120 billion, not counting the logistical, legal, and professional training challenges. And even if everything went perfectly, which is highly unlikely, manufacturers would opt for mass automation to reduce costs. Robots, not workers, would occupy the assembly lines. But perhaps the cruelest point of this policy is how it claims to protect the working class while making it more vulnerable. The average American, already crushed by inflation, student debt, rising prices, and stagnant wages, now faces a new disguised tax: the patriotic cost of a car. In cities like Toledo, Ohio, and Rockford, Illinois, the feeling in the streets is one of betrayal. Trump said he was going to protect us, but I feel like he's protecting the profits of manufacturers, not our future, says Maria, a worker laid off from a Stellantis factory after 22 years of service. Now I don't even know if I'll be able to pay my mortgage. And while families lose their income, their stability, their hope, Trump gets on stages and repeats over and over that everything will work out. But the market says otherwise. Wall Street analysts forecast a drop of up to 12% in new car sales over the next 12 months. The average consumer will postpone purchases, look for used cars, lose access to credit, and this affects the entire economy. Banks, insurers, garages, transporters. The domino effect has already begun, and no one is safe. What was supposed to be a nationalist measure is quickly turning into a silent collapse, a collapse that won't be broadcast live on television, but that you'll feel in your wallet, in your job, and in your garage. This is where the story stops being about tariffs and becomes a question of identity. The American car has always been more than just a product. It represents social mobility, freedom, autonomy. The sound of a V8 engine is the echo of a nation that has always believed in its own potential. You know what happens when a gear gets stuck in a moving machine? It grinds, vibrates, and ends up breaking everything around it. That's exactly what's happening to the American automobile industry right now. But unlike a visible explosion, the collapse is occurring silently in Excel spreadsheets, in empty warehouses, intense meetings between executives and suppliers, and in the tired look of thousands of workers who haven't been laid off yet, but know they will be. While cameras remain focused on Trump's speeches and headlines get lost in nationalist slogans, the most fundamental gears of American automobile production are being crushed from within. For decades, the United States built a complex automotive production ecosystem that transcended borders. Engines from Canada, electrical cables from Mexico, electronic components from South Korea, embedded software from Germany. All of this circulated with almost surgical precision, allowing cars to be assembled in record time and at competitive prices. With the new taxes imposed by Trump, this global symphony has become a dissonant racket. Companies forced to relocate parts and suppliers have discovered an obvious fact. It's simply not viable in the short term. There isn't enough internal production capacity to replace 30 to 40% of the global supply chain, and even when it exists, it costs far too much. A cable harness that previously cost $11 imported from Mexico now costs $37 if produced in the United States. The price has tripled. The market cannot absorb another increase. Consumers are exhausted. Inflation has eaten away at their purchasing power. Credit has become more difficult. And while the government sticks to slogans, car dealerships have become battlefields where salespeople try to explain price increases of up to 25% on models that haven't changed at all except for their price. The trade war isn't just blocking production. It's stifling innovation. Instead of developing new models, new technologies, new solutions, American manufacturers are focusing on a single question: how to survive until next month. Did you know that in 2025, BYD, a Chinese manufacturer, surpassed Tesla in global export volume? While American factories struggle to import basic parts, the Chinese are exporting complete electric cars to more than 80 countries. China doesn't depend on a fragile international network. It has built its own internal supply chain over the past 15 years. From lithium to glass, from semiconductor to dashboard, it doesn't suffer from customs taxes. It reaps the benefits of an anticipated strategy. While the U.S. debates whether it's better to import headlights from Germany or Poland to avoid taxes on Mexico, China launches a new electric model every 3 months. And it's not just China. South Korea, Vietnam, India are all preparing to occupy the space that the United States is leaving. And it's not about copying, it's about surpassing. In the last quarter, Chinese BYD cars represented 23% of total sales in the Latin American market. In some African countries, they already dominate 40% of the market. And even in Europe, where consumers are particularly demanding, Chinese vehicles are beginning to establish themselves as a credible alternative. Meanwhile, in the United States, dealerships are closing, factories are reducing their teams, and the Department of Commerce is trying to explain the inexplicable. How is the most powerful country in the world losing leadership in a sector it invented itself? If this story has made you think, if it has opened your eyes to what's hiding behind the headlines, then like this video, share it with those who need to understand what's really happening, and subscribe to the channel right now. The climate of economic uncertainty extends far beyond automotive. When Trump announced a 25% duty on Chinese electric vehicles and components, directly affecting a market worth more than $38 billion, China responded in a subtle but implacable manner by rejecting 150,000 tons of American beef in a single move without warning or clear explanation. Official reason: non-compliance with food safety standards. But are we really facing a simple health problem, or is it something much vaster, deliberate, and surgically executed to strike not only the agri-food sector, but the very heart of America's cultural and political identity? The refused meat wasn't spoiled. It was marked as retaliation, hitting Texas, Kansas, and Nebraska, 3 states that together represent more than 70% of beef exports to China. States where feedlots are full, contracts were signed, and trucks ready to go. Losses began to accumulate like forgotten carcasses in cold storage. Massive cancellations, price drops, thousands of tons of meat in stock without buyers, producers forced to sell at a loss on the domestic market. Imagine the despair of a breeder whose $4 million contract is suspended overnight without any alternative outlet. Now multiply this despair by hundreds and add a layer of political indignation because these states formed Trump's electoral base, and today they see their economy collapsing because of a trade war they themselves supported and which is turning against them like an angry bull. Trump claims he's protecting America from Chinese abuses, but can we really talk about protection when you lose your main customer? When the domestic market is unable to absorb the surplus? When prices collapse by 7.3% in 2 weeks and no one wants to buy anymore? And while Americans were taking losses in their silos and cold rooms, Russia was advancing its pawns. In the same quarter that China rejected American meat, Russian exports to the Chinese market jumped by 32%, reaching 41,000 tons, a record figure. But the most important thing wasn't the volume, it was the strategy. Russia didn't improvise, it anticipated. Since 2023, Moscow had been signing bilateral agreements with Beijing, creating an exclusive veterinary inspection system allowing more than 40 Russian slaughterhouses to export directly to China. In November 2024, a new railway line was inaugurated linking Volgograd to the Chinese city of Shanghai. What once took 28 days by boat now takes 11 days by rail. The result: Fresh, inexpensive meat with approved inspection without going through ports controlled by the United States. 89% of Russian meat exported to China is now paid for in yuan or rubles without any involvement of the American dollar. This trade war isn't just redistributing contracts, it's redrawing the map of international alliances. While the United States is still trying to understand the impact of the Chinese refusal, Russia announces an investment plan of $1.1 billion to double its meat export capacity by 2027. 3 mega-farms are under construction, each able to accommodate more than 100,000 head of cattle. And while all this is unfolding, what does the American government say? That everything is fine, that it's just a phase, that the market will eventually adjust. But international trade experts like Deborah Elms warn when supply chains adapt to new standards, new currencies, and new inspection protocols, turning back becomes almost impossible. In 2018, the idea that Russia would replace the United States as China's main meat supplier would have seemed like geopolitical delirium, a country with extreme climate, precarious infrastructure in many regions, and without a real export tradition competing with the largest American slaughterhouses. Impossible. But in 2025, this impossible has become routine, and it's no coincidence that this occurred while the United States was busy fighting against itself. As the global landscape shifts, Trump distracts with outlandish declarations about annexing Canada and even Greenland, calling the northern border artificial and suggesting that Canada could be one of the best states of America. Such rhetoric isn't just absurd, it's a calculated diversion tactic designed to dominate media headlines while real economic consequences unfold. The dollar beginning to be circumvented, Europe distancing itself, Canada strengthening ties with Asia, China signing multi-billion-dollar agreements, and Russia transforming its infrastructure. The ultimate truth has become painfully clear. What began as a crusade for fair tariffs has evolved into a trade war, then an energy shortage, then an industrial collapse, followed by a global food imbalance, and finally a national identity crisis where the country seems to be fighting against its own history. Today, the United States is running in slow motion, the global economic engine showing signs of breakdown, inflation advancing like a shadow, unemployment ceasing to be just a number as it becomes a neighbor, a relative, a friend. Citizen confidence is at its lowest level in more than 10 years. The markets feel it, the Dow Jones is collapsing, Tesla loses nearly a quarter of its value in a few hours, giants like Ford and GM retreat, close factories, abandon their projects, yet Trump declares, as if announcing a reward, they will be richer than ever. But who is they? Certainly not the ordinary worker counting pennies to fill up the tank, buy milk, or renegotiate debts. This American is exhausting themselves without respite, losing confidence. The real drama here isn't just economic. It's the brutal disconnect between concrete reality and the narrative sold to the public. It's the sensation that no one at the top sees what's happening outside the walls of Washington. And that brings us to the heart of the problem: trust. Not trust in numbers, but trust in the idea that there's still a plan, a compass, a purpose. What we're seeing today is a government that normalizes decline, that calls strategy what is merely a retreat, that transforms the loss of influence, power, and international respect into a campaign argument. The project of greatness has become a policy of isolation. The tariffs have created bottlenecks, not opportunities. The walls erected promise security, but what they've really enclosed is the hope of millions of forgotten citizens. Today, the United States looks around and finds that it no longer leads. Canada exports energy to the Pacific, China advances in technological innovation at its own pace, Russia becomes a global food supplier, Europe strengthens without waiting for Washington, and the BRICS create new economic pacts independent of the dollar. And here's the bitter truth: American leadership hasn't been snatched away, it has been abandoned, exchanged for headlines and podiums, traded for rhetoric that feeds the base but empties the country. Yet all is not lost. As long as there are elections, there are choices. As long as there is a free press, there are denunciations. As long as there are attentive citizens, there is resistance. This video is an invitation to reflect, a call for lucidity, an attempt to transform indignation into awareness, because what we're experiencing isn't just another political confrontation. It's the reorganization of the world as we know it. If you've made it this far, thank you. Your attention is worth gold in times of distraction. Like the video to show you care. Leave a comment with your vision, your question, your outcry. I read them all. And subscribe to receive upcoming publications. See you there?